Hello, good evening, and welcome to this virtual event from Majors and Quinn. My name is Steph. I am a bookseller and the events associate here at the bookstore. For those who don't know, we are an independent bookstore in Uptown Minneapolis. If it's one of your first time at our virtual events, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And if you're coming back for a second or a third event, welcome back. Thank you for your continued support of our program here. Tonight, I am really excited to introduce two wonderful poets. Todd Boss, who is presenting Someday, the Plan of a Town, who will be in conversation with Jim Moore, the author of Prognosis. If you are interested in buying either of their collections of poetry or any of their previous works, I will put a link to our website and our phone number in the comments of the video. And so you can either purchase them online or give us a call. We are happy to order those for you. We do ship internationally. So wherever you are, you can get it. And speaking of the comments, please sound off. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you have any questions for either of the poets throughout the events, you can put them in the comments as well. We'll have time for a quick little 15-minute Q&A at the end. So with that said, I will read some bios and then we'll be on with the show. Todd Boss is the author of 3 previous collections of poetry, most recently Tough Luck. His work has appeared in the New Yorker Poetry, American Poetry Review, and other publications. Still nomadic, Boss has most recently been based in Phoenix, Arizona, and Austin, Texas. And Jim Moore's most recent book of poetry is called Prognosis and was published by Grey Wolf in November 2021. He is a past recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Poetry. His work has appeared recently in the Paris Review and The Nation, and is forthcoming in the New Yorker and the Yale Review. He lives in Minneapolis and Spoleto, Italy, with his wife, the photographer Joanne Verberg. All right, with that out of the way, I will get out of your hair and we can kick off. Thanks so much, guys.
All right. Steph, thank you so much. And thank you to Majors and Quinn. The heroic effort that bookstores have been making over these last few years has made so much difference to so many of us. So I'm just going to read a short poem by the Japanese medieval poet Sagyo as a kind of introduction to Todd's wonderful book, because I really think the poem captures the spirit of the book. And I think as we go along, you'll see what I mean. So I'm not sure which century this was written in, but a long time ago, Sagyo. Nowhere is there place to stop and live, so only everywhere will do. Each and every grass-made hut soon leaves its place within this withering world. So Todd comes and goes through a lot of huts in the course of this book. It's a book that really has to do with making a home for yourself wherever you are in the world. It seems perhaps even more appropriate over the last few weeks with the huge numbers of refugees streaming out of Ukraine and around the world, in fact. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd, and he's going to do what he does, and then we'll talk and read some poems and take your questions if you have any at the end.
Sounds good, Jim. Thank you. It's great to be sharing the stage with you again. I think it's been about 5 years since we did that. I really appreciate your taking the time today, and for all your advocacy of my work over the years. You were my mentor with the Loft Mentor Series many years ago, and you were very kind and supportive of my work then. And so it's nice to have that continuity through line with you today. I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with my poems. That's something that I do at all my readings if I can. And I'll start off with the title poem from the collection, which is called Someday, the Plan of a Town. Someday, the plan of a town, right down to its side tracks and back alleyways, will match, or so goes the dream, with some identical patch of neural network your rogue thoughts roam in. Overlay it like those musculoskeletal transparencies with which anatomy textbooks come bound. And you'll be at home in its dogleg joint work of cobbled kinks. And your body will resound at every fork, tuning fork like. And every road you ever rambled will be re-scrambled to appear to have brought you here where you fit so perfectly, where you can practically predict where to find every bench or postbox, and where you can cue every little old lady who leaves her flat to buy bread, as if she were locking up a little room in your head and trading your idea of money for your idea of food before returning to wipe her shoes on the mat your mind's laid flat and fit her flat key to its shoulder into the strike plate keyhole through which you daily romance her as she grows older. That worn, dome-topped slot that looks as if two question marks met on the road to kiss and mate and make one question, opening, opening, each forever the other's only answer. And if it's okay, I'm just going to fire through about 6 more poems and then we'll get to some exchange. Jim, I know you've come with a few poems of your own to share, and you should feel free to interrupt and jump in with those between mine if you're so moved. This one's called Essentials. And before I read it, I should explain, as Jim mentioned, I've been a nomad for the past 4 years. I gave up all my belongings, except for 2 suitcases worth of clothes and essentials, about 4 years ago, 2018. And I've been a nomad ever since. First, I did 30 house sits around the world in consecutive order, one after the other. And then when COVID came, I stayed in the United States, obviously, and I've been short-term renting and staying with friends and family and others while I've been in quarantine or in COVID. This poem is called Essentials. I'm down to 2 bags. I use a friend's address. I've only got one last recurring nightmare that forces me to face my ex. There's still one child I haven't lost, but he's next. Even loved ones are non-essential, sorry to report. You've come here for news of how to live, but grieve and grieve is all I can say. Grieve enough, you can even get grieving out of the way. Grief's chiefest among chores. Do it well, and the mostly empty universe is yours. He divides his time between is a line I always wanted in my bio. He divides his time between Reykjavik and Sandusky, Ohio. He summers on Lake Como and winters in Aspen. As it happens, no place is like home. I already split my attentions between this world and any halfway decent poem. Doctors call it deficit, but some divisions make surpluses. We multiply when we divide our lives, our loves, and our addresses. Last year, I kept 40 plus pets. House sitting for strangers is as varied as it gets, dividing 12 months into 20 sits in 16 countries on 5 continents. I had a married life before in a subdivision of peace and war. In equal thirds, my loved ones ate my heart like a festival roast. Now my father's son is a ghost, a wisp of smoke, a metaphor. He divides his time between nothing and much and matters and any more. Jim and I talked before the reading, and we thought we'd focus a little bit on a theme. And the theme tonight is resilience, recovery, and resilience. And as you hear these poems, you might notice that this journey of mine was a bit of a journey of recovery from a lot of things that were going on in my life at the time that I decided to make it. And this is one of those. It's called Fairer. The claw marks in my neck, long faded. The steam of hate evaporated. Attempted identity theft subverted. Assets, passwords, passport converted. Accusations of assault reversed. 2 years court fees reimbursed. Restraining orders at last elapsed. Libelous campaigns collapsed. Attempts to turn my friendships rotten and threats of murder and vengeance forgotten. I'm finally ready, whatever comes next, to re-engage the fairer sex. One of the things I was recovering from on this journey of mine is the estrangement from my daughter, that at the time was 6 years old and now is almost 8 now. She was 13 when she decided she didn't want anything to do with her dad. I was still living at home and married. And it's persisted, this estrangement, to this day. And I wrote this poem on the train out of Budapest after this event actually happened to me. At the Sofitel in Budapest, alone, regretting leaving, estranged from my daughter 6 years almost, believing it might be 6 and 6 more before she texts or answers when I call. Trying to remember how it all began, I find that I can. Every ball thrown at her, every tear, every tatter, very matter-of-factly now, I can recall exactly. Even so, I saw her at the funicular today, in her old winter downs, 12 years younger, chattering away. I reached to help her up before I became aware she had her own father there, clutching his path. And we rose while I fell, the tall Sofitel and the Danube gliding away outside the glass. Sophie, tell your story. Say you're sorry or not sorry. Sophie, tell of life, your studies, your plans. From Sofitel to Sofitel I go. It's a mockery. Soundproof doors closing behind me as if a quiet so bad could be improved. Sophie, tell Dad how much longer you plan to be the stronger one, unmoving, unmovable, unmoved. This one occurred to me after reading an Annie Dillard essay about the keenest blade ever discovered. The keenest blade would, wouldn't it, end in a cutting edge, an atom thin. And in fact, one such has been by folks who find things found. Obsidian among ruins, a blade of stone with an edge so fine it doesn't cut exactly, but divides among things, sorting with every stroke. Translucent if you hold it to the light, too fragile to be used and made, they think, for making's sake, for pride. You can hone a blade till there is no blade, France rightly wrote. And if it's true we murder to dissect, what crimes mere differentiating do? Even blunt things wedge the world apart. But all is one. Distinction fades. I'm done with sharpening and sharpening blades. And this is one of the last poems in the collection. I'll end with it for now. It's called Always That Last Trip to the Airport. Always that last trip to the airport in a taxi. Always the city through the windows seeming unexplored, no matter how exhaustively I toured it. Always the temptation to cancel flights and remain a new resident. If the world is, aren't I too in pencil, a sketch of a man? Is it by accident I'm grafted here, drafted here, a figure stenciled on a foreign scene, rogue but increasingly road weary, denizen of the requisite in-between? Not all who march for a cause. I travel like some drink, to be lost. My bags may as well be stuffed with gauze for all the loss my journeys cost. Then, airline? Asks the driver. I check my phone. I can't remember. We seem to be here early. We seem to have navigated the stars. Seems I've been studying my chauffeur in the mirror, tanned Britannica, brown-eyed Koran. Reading and rereading there, I swear, how I can love anyone, how I can love anyone and anywhere.
Beautiful poems, and I suppose at their core, there is a lot of grief, sadness. At the same time, there's something that really does speak to our theme for tonight, of recovery and resilience. And I have several questions that I will kind of focus in that direction, and then maybe read a couple of poems of my own, and then we can see where we are in terms of time. So I was reading an essay recently by a psychiatrist who said that, in his opinion, the purpose of therapy is to help the client understand how chaotic and impossible his or her life is, and to let that be the fact, and to find a way to be playful with it. So I have no idea, how accurate this is, but since I read it right at the time that I was reading your book, it really struck me as so appropriate, because your poems, even the darkest poems, are always playful. There are always kind of little, I don't know if jokes is the right word, but plays on words going on at the same time. And I think as a reader, what that does, or as a listener tonight, it gives you the feeling that no matter how difficult, no matter the difficulties that the poet is going through, there's a sense that in your case that he's not buried by them. He's able to be in relationship to them, and yes, even to be playful with them. And when I think about recovery and resilience, it seems like, well, that's a good strategy. That's that's a good. I don't know how. I kind of want to ask you this: how this came to be. I mean, years ago when we were working together, you already had that quality of being playful in the work, and formally playful as well, which is something else we can talk about. Both subject matter, in other words, and also the form of the poems. I guess maybe my first question is, these qualities that I'm naming of yours, this playfulness, this formal playfulness, this playfulness with subject matter, is pretty unusual. I mean, it happens in poetry, of course, but to have it front and center the way it is in your work does strike me as something quite unusual. And I'm just wondering where that comes from. If there are other poets, I mean, you mentioned Franz Wright in one of your poems, but and he has some of that, I guess, but are there poets, either contemporary poets or older poets, or maybe people from other art forms, or maybe family members, or where does this, where do you think, can you speculate on where this playfulness in the face of grief comes from?
What a fantastic question. No, there's a lot of ways that I'm considering answering. The short answer to poets that inspire me in that way, the one name that comes to mind most readily is Kay Ryan, who I think I'm a big fan of. I once wrote her a fan letter, and she wrote me back, "Greetings to a fellow rhyme-crazed wretch." And
That's perfect.
and
You could have
and even in that phrase, there's a great sense of humor in it, and you know, amazing grace that saved a wretch like me. That word has that sort of griefy resonance to it, built right in. Her poems gave me permission to play early on in my career, to really play with the sounds of words. And when you play with the sounds of words, you're already kind of playing, aren't you? So playing with the sound pushes you to play with the sense too,
Did you ever
right?
play an instrument, or do you play an instrument?
I played piano for 7 years, but I don't consider myself a musician.
Did
I
that
don't.
have any effect on the sound quality, do you think, or are they your?
I don't know. I don't know. I
Just
do
say
think
yes.
I I do think though that my theater training helped a lot. I had these summer programs as a 4-H student in 4-H member in Wisconsin, that was at the time funded by the University of Wisconsin. And every summer I would go and participate in these phenomenal programs, these theater programs. And they were very heightened for high school level, participants. They were really evolved. They were taught by a university professor, and she had this fantastic facility with play, and with inviting us to have all these limitations and sit in this kind of griefy space or a difficult situation with one another as we were creating a scene, for example, and play with it until it evolved into something that was theater worthy. It wasn't just a troupe that memorized a play and put it on. It was a troupe that actually wrote the play together by improvising it, and then put it on all in the span of a week. It was a very intensive program. And I think that had a big influence on me. When I went to St. Olaf, I almost went to the para college where you could kind of invent your own major, and I almost majored in play. So it's really interesting that you pick all this up.
Interesting. Yeah,
Lots of ways to
I think
tackle it.
you did major in play, as it turns out, after all.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay. Well, that's very helpful to
That
understand.
that is a fascinating read. If you can, where did you see that with the psychiatrist?
It's a British psychologist who writes some about poetry and mostly about therapy. And I'm unfortunately not thinking of his name right now.
Yeah.
But he had an interview in the Paris Review a while ago, and I've been kind of tracking his books since then. He's sort of counterintuitive to what you think therapists are going to say
Yeah.
about what the process is.
Huh.
So yeah, I will think of it and get the name to you when I do.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Um, so as we now know from your reading tonight, your life these last months has taken you everywhere. A lot of moving around, so many places it sort of makes my head spin. And so I wonder if in that process, having just come myself off 7 weeks of travel, um, how does that affect your writing process? Do you have a regular way of working? Do you sit down every morning, as some poets do? Is it purely by inspiration? How did that travel intersect with our block, the right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I remember you telling an audience years ago that you carve out time every morning and work every morning as just a routine
Yeah,
part of your practice. That's always impressed me, and my hat's off to writers who can write like that. That's not me. Um, I I I sort of I don't know. I could be much more disciplined than I am, but I sort of just am kind of open to things to strike me wherever I am and whenever I am, as I imagine you probably are too. And I just sort of rely on those moments to discipline me, to tell me when there's a poem to be found. Uh, I may miss a lot that way because my butt isn't planted in the chair the way it ought to be, as often as it is. But walking is one of my favorite things to do, and you know how that tradition is
right.
ages old, and maybe I am in the chair in a way as I'm walking. Maybe that's my practice, and I'm working through thoughts that way. Um, I write really well on the road, and it's interesting that some places I've been have not been conducive to writing, and other places have been.
Hmm.
Um,
What's that
I
about?
noticed, I noticed, for example, when I put the book together, that there were about 6 or 7 of the poems that originated in Venice, in not Venice, Vienna, Austria, where I only spent about a month. So it's not like I was there for, the majority of my time. But when I look back on Vienna, the thing I think about is that I don't know if you've ever been there. They have these
Yeah.
yeah, everything there is really tall. You walk into a cafe or a restaurant, and the ceilings just sort of soar, and the windows on the street are, 9 feet tall, and even the door you push open to get into the place is, 8 feet tall. Everything's just sort of high. It sort of buoys you, lifts you up the minute you walk into a space, and I wonder if that had an effect, you
Hmm.
know?
Do you write in coffee houses or
I
is
write in
that?
coffee houses
Yeah,
a lot. Yeah.
yeah, me
And
too.
then, yeah, and then I find a place in the house whatever house I'm in, and I just get cozy there too. But yeah, I love cafes.
Well, some places these poems do have a lot of darkness in them, and probably that light and that sense of airiness in the present moment probably did help you, I would guess,
Mm.
in being able to encounter some of this material. Um, so I've noticed that where the tone of a poem could conceivably be bitter or ponderous or otherwise heavy-handed, that the playfulness in the writing creates, here's that word, a kind of airiness and a lightness, which can serve heavy subjects to keep them from becoming top heavy. That's something I really appreciate about the poems. Um, Moving to a specific poem, The Keenest Blade, when it comes to resilience and recovery, seems to say a lot about that theme. Can you talk about the poem some more? Would you be willing to do that? And especially the end of the poem.
Yeah. There are people in my life that are still sharpening their blades, still honing their blades. And um, I've watched them over years, and it doesn't seem to do them any good. Um, I recently looked up resilience too. When we picked this theme, I was kind of thinking about it for another project too, and so it made sense for me to look into it a little bit. And there was a list, I think Psychology Today or something listed like 10 things you should do, if you want to be more resilient. And one of them was edit your outlook. And I I thought, well, that's something that poets do, um, every time they come to the page, they're editing their outlook. They're changing the way they see things and they're changing the way they think about things. And they want to be taught by the poem, right? Poets always want to be learning from their poetry. And so in a way, I don't know that it can be any other way, can it? I mean, can a poet who constantly wants to edit their outlook dwell on anything? I mean, does
Well,
it?
they may, but then they cut it, right? I mean, don't you find that happening? You say, oh God, no.
Oh, oh, I've definitely got obsessions. I think we all have obsessions.
Yeah.
But that honing of a blade, or having that sort of I don't know what you'd call it, a grudge. Can a poet really have a grudge? If a poet is truly coming to the page every day to learn how to edit their outlook.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. I can't think of anybody offhand who's like that, but there may well be. Maybe I just am deliberately forgetting them. What you're saying about revision and coming back to the process reminds me, as you know, there's a great line in the German poet Rilke finishing a poem, "You must change your life." William Stafford wrote an essay called "You Must Revise Your Life." And I think that speaks to what you're saying. Well, maybe for now, maybe one more question, and then I'll read a couple of poems. Is that?
Yeah, that'd be amazing. I'd love to hear from you. Jim, I hope you didn't freeze up.
Hey, just gonna hop back in here. Jim, if you can hear me, just close out your browser and then re-enter it. That should reboot things. Todd, in the meantime, do you have another poem you'd like to share with us or something to read?
Oh no, let's give Jim a second.
Give
Probably
me a second here.
shouldn't take him too long.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear some of the new stuff that he's been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Well, we seem to have lost everyone.
Yeah, sorry about that, Todd. We are still waiting for Jim to come
Yeah.
back here. If anybody in the audience has any questions, oh, here he is. Hold on. Pause.
So I must have frozen, right?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
we got you back. You're looking
And what
good.
I was saying was so incredibly brilliant. Oh, what a shame. Did you hear any of what I said about I was asking you about the poem Essentials and the way grief works in that poem, how it works. It seems to be like a thread for you, and I'm just wondering if you can talk about that a little bit in the context of when could it be overwhelming? How does it open you up, or does it close you off sometimes? How does, because it's so important to all these poems.
Yeah. You know, I think I think in my very first book, there was a poem about the Buddha saying that he teaches grief and the transformation of grief. And I think about that from time to time. And on this journey, uh, you know, it was funny because I started the journey not thinking of it as any kind of a recovery journey. It just felt like the thing to do, and I set off on an adventure, and I was pretty positive and excited and happy. I'm a pretty positive and excited and happy guy anyway. But then it kind of nagged at me, like, well, are you really just doing this because you want to, or is there some, what really put you on the road, like this? What made you give up everything? And people would, strangers would that I met on the road, on the way would talk to me about this and ask me, and they weren't quite satisfied with my answer. So then I started not getting satisfied with my answer, too. And so I would think, well, maybe I am dealing with this, what is this thing, maybe, and if grief is there to be transformed, then isn't my job as a poet to edit, that, and to transform that, and to study it, to take it apart and look at it. So yeah, the poems that seemed the strongest when everything was said and done, and I started collecting for the book, I realized that that through line was pretty prevalent in the best of the poems, and that um, almost in retrospective, I was dealing with something that I wasn't fully conscious of. And this is nothing new to poets. I think we discover ourselves in our poetry all the time.
Yeah, and I think it occurs to me as you were talking just now that the kind of playfulness, intuitive playfulness that exists in the poems is probably similar to the kind of openness and playfulness one needs when traveling, when moving, especially into places one doesn't know, and being open to that stranger coming in. And so there's probably a quality there. The two might well have reinforced each other.
See, that's the answer I should have given you earlier. You're absolutely right.
We must revise our answers. So look, I'm going to read a poem. I'm checking out the time, and when I'm done, I have a request, which is that you might read the last poem in the book, if that's possible. But let me read one poem that I think really connects with what we're talking about tonight. I wrote a lot about the pandemic, and this is a poem that I wrote very early during the pandemic, and I had a sort of hallucination. So it's called The Pandemic Halo. The pandemic halo began to appear a few weeks into it. Oddly, the first time, it was surrounding the head of an old lad. He was being walked, as usual, at 7 a.m. by his young owner. Lots of lamppost stops. There it was, faint at first, then hovering at a tilt above the silky head. I thought maybe it was a weird trick of light. The day was bright, but the next morning it was still there. That same day, the nurse, who wears a pink cape and parks in the lot across from me, almost always empty now, was trotting along on her way to the clinic that is just below my window. She had it too. I don't think she noticed it at all. She was walking quickly, a little late to work, so I think that was on her mind, not holiness. The third day, a young man in a red cap with a backpack slouched past. I'd never seen him before. You could see he was seriously depressed, looking down at the sidewalk. But it was there, firmly in place. It was above him, of course. He couldn't see how beautiful he really was. And that woman with the nasty little dog, same thing. By now, the pandemic halo is well recorded. Everyone knows about it. We almost take it for granted. What had once seemed amazing. Somehow, it is related to breath. When we die, it goes away. After the pandemic is over, they say the halo effect will disappear. They say we will return to life as usual. We won't need it, they say. I have my doubts. I think we might need it more than ever. I think we might be saying things like, remember how amazing it was during the pandemic? How everyone had a halo? How grief and holiness were all we knew of the world? And the sight of a dog at a lamppost could bring us to tears. So that's a poem that I hope has some of those qualities of recovery and resilience.
That's a beauty, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd.
Did I see that published somewhere?
That was in a magazine called The Sun, which is a magazine I love. It's a kind of a general issue magazine that features poetry and
I think someone online in my networks shared that around it. I've read it and I remember it well.
It's been around a little bit on the internet. And just very briefly, a woman wrote me, whom I don't know, saying that she was in a group, some kind of recovery group of 50 people, and the person running the group said, "Well, I want to read this poem, Pandemic Halo, and I want you all to read it along with me." So somehow, she said it was total chaos. It was like, horrible. It sort of got sorted out at the end, but I guess I love that story. I'm not quite sure I do. Anyway, Todd, let's get back to your book, and I don't know if we've got questions, Steph, or not. If we don't, we can talk and read more, but at least I would appreciate it if you would read that last poem in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, if everybody in the audience wants to take this time to think of any questions you may have and put them in the chat, we can get to them after. But Todd, I would love to hear that last poem.
Yeah, thanks. I actually want to read two, if that's okay. The last poem is extremely short, and your poem about the halo makes me think of this one. So I want to see if I can share my screen again so you can see it. It's a little bit longer. It's called 9 Voices at St. Martin's. It's probably about as long as the one you read, Jim. I am not a believer, nor do I believe in disbelief. I'm not too proud for anything, and neither facts nor fictions frighten me. I'm comfortable holding a stranger's gaze, and I often feel God or something godly gazing back. My life is full of the usual urgent, necessary, and unnecessary distractions. But yesterday, in London with a friend, I descended into the Crypt Cafe and then wandered upward into St. Martin's, where a choir of 9 was not so much singing as releasing birds of hymnody into the airy sanctuary, lilting flocks of wingy sounds, and by the time they finally began Abide With Me, I was openly weeping in my row, my friend kindly nesting my hand, and the world took on that forest glade glow it gets when you know beauty may be found. And suddenly this simple, sturdy, clear-windowed temple with its weather-vane steeple was my favorite of all Europe's showy churches, and London's people seemed the finest people, and it didn't seem at all odd to find myself here, that there should be a God, or that God, whether soul or energy or light, might be right there, abiding in the patterns of voices in mid-flight, or the patter of rain on Duncannon Street. I mopped my face with my pocket square and stuffed it back away, and wanted more, would have stayed all day, but one more tune and they were done and filed away behind the altar, where no doubt they folded their books and packed their packs and bloomed their umbrellas into the afternoon and crossed into the underground and queued ordinarily for the train. If I passed one going home, I didn't recognize, I didn't know to praise them for my opened ears, my opened eyes, the music my own train made as it wheeled, the colors of the sky, the brick towns passing by, the trees on the ridgeline, and the horses in the field.
That's a beauty.
Thank you.
Really a beauty.
And the last poem in the collection is this one. In the verbena, the bees are auxiliary verbs again. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been.
Love that poem.
Thanks.
Well, it's a happy poem, you know? Really happy.
Yeah, it's nature doing its thing.
Playful in another way. Yeah.
I had that poem for years, many, many years, and never found a home in any of my other books, and it felt right to have it land in this one.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys. Nothing from the audience yet. There is a comment from Cami T that I wanted to share. They say that they were overwhelmed by At the Sofitel, Todd, and I was as well. That was a really beautiful poem. Thank you so much for sharing that. I did have a question though for you guys, because as you mentioned, you chose this theme for the evening that kind of, wove throughout all of the poems. And I was wondering if you could give us a little window into that conversation, and if you'd thought about other themes and, other paths that this reading may have taken.
You want to go to it, Todd? Because it sort of came from your thinking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book can be thought of in a lot of different ways. So every time I organize a reading with another poet, I give them a list of themes that we could take, because I don't want every conversation to be the same. So there are poems in here about sex and sexuality. There are poems about home and belonging. There are poems about materialism and minimalism. Poems about children and parenting. The list kind of goes on and on. So when Jim got the list, I don't know why did you pick this theme, Jim?
Well, what other theme? I mean, nothing against sex, but I mean, this is what we've been all about the last 2 or 3 years, right? Maybe longer, actually. And it just seems like, really, what could be more important? I'm sort of curious, Todd, where after this book, are you already working again, or I don't know what the lag is between acceptance for publication and publication. If you're on to some other, you're a man of projects. I know that, and I'm wondering if you got one going.
Well, I sold my first children's book a little while back. I don't know if you know that or not,
No.
but Simon & Schuster's Beach Lane imprint will be coming out with a children's book next year, and it's kind of got my heart, because even though it's written and already slated for publication and the illustrator's been selected, it's called The Boy Who Said Wow, and it's a retelling of an actual story about a boy in Boston, a nonverbal autistic boy who interrupted a program at Symphony Hall by uttering the word wow after a performance just before the audience began to clap. And it was on a radio broadcast, so it was captured on radio tape, and 70 million, or how many ever million people have heard this little utterance. And it was very unusual for him to speak at all. And I interviewed the whole family and got kind of intimate with the story and wrote the little story. And now I'm working it up into a symphonic one act for families. So it would be The Boy Who Said Wow, kind of a stage play that would take place right in the orchestra, right in and around the orchestra itself in a symphony hall setting. So that too is called The Boy Who Said Wow, and I'm hard at work on the libretto for that. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep churning out poems as long as W. Norton will have me, and I'm no dummy. I feel very lucky that anyone is interested in my work at all, least of all you, Jim, and I just owe it to everyone to keep up my end of the bargain, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Another quick comment from Madeline Moore, who says, thanks so much for sharing the St. Martin's poem. Very touching.
Hi, Madeline. I've got a St. Martin poem too. I'll send it to you, Todd. It's
wonderful.
Worried how similar it is. It was written decades ago.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You don't think you can find it now? We've got about 8 minutes.
I think it's a really good poem, but it's a really long poem. I think it's better. I mean, I'm tempted, but I think it's better not to get into it. But it's very similar. You'll see. Yeah.
I would love to see that. There's something about St. Martin's for me. I've been in that church before. I don't know if I spent 2 years in New Hampshire, and I had kind of a fascination with Shaker Village in Canterbury, New Hampshire. And there's something really Shaker-esque about that church, and it kind of calls to mind that sort of plain speaking sort of practicality that I love so much about the Shaker tradition.
There's something. It's a very inviting space. I happened to hear a concert there, and just it was watching these people come out, having been kind of transformed by listening to music, and the way they said goodbye to each other. It was. And again, like you, I was a stranger in that situation, and I think it got through to me in a way that.
Wow, I almost wonder if your poem was it published? I wonder if your poem.
It was published. It was, I think it was in The Long Experience of Love. I'm not sure. It might have been in the Freedom of History. It was written during a time when I was traveling a lot in Europe, and but it's old, and I don't think it was ever in a magazine. So you would.
It may have subconsciously influenced me.
You would have to be a very faithful reader of my work to have found it.
Which I am.
Thank you.
Jim, what are you working on now?
So I'm working on new poems. I had this book came out in November, and there's a kind of a lag time between, in my case, between having a book accepted and when it's published. And so I was already kind of starting on new stuff. And I hope that some of the lightness of spirit around heavy, difficult subjects that I feel so powerfully in your work, I hope is part of these poems. I feel like it's too soon to know how different this book is from the last book. I don't know, but I feel there is some difference that I'm interested in and working towards. So I'm writing poems, Yeah.
Do you feel the itch? Do you feel that itch often from book to book to make to kind of make a different project?
I didn't
in the last?
In the first several books I published, I just if I wrote a good poem, that was it. In the book it goes. Forget about anything else. But in the last few books, I think because so many younger poets are working more as a book rather than poem to poem, it's like within a book. So I found, and especially maybe with the last book, that the last few months, or maybe even the last year of working on the book, when a lot of the poems have been written, is when the book comes together in a certain way. Something is working unconsciously through the process of writing, but it's not till the end when it comes together. And I really like that feeling. I really like that.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. So starting off with one from James C. Henderson. Does your Midwestern background influence all of your poems written in exotic parts of the world?
I say yes. What about you?
Well, how can it not, I suppose, right? I am what I am, as the saying goes. Um, I I I've sort of been self-conscious about being pigeonholed as a Midwestern writer, especially with the last three books, which have so much to do with the farm that I grew up on and my sort of Midwestern parents. Um, this book, doesn't have any reference to the farm. My parents aren't in it, much to their relief. Um, and it feels like a much more worldly book. But yeah, I can't edit. There's certain things about about yourself that you can't edit, right? I'm always going to see things
I think we're lucky to be from a provisional place because we're easily overwhelmed, and that's what you want, right? You want, my God, look at that church, St. Martin's in the Field. Holy baloney. Whereas if you'd been raised in London or Paris or New York, another beautiful church. I think it's a great advantage, personally.
Maybe, but I know people who live in LA and elsewhere who are full of wonder about the world.
Well, I guess that's possible.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know. I'm not a very good judge of my own outlook, but even though I'm tasked with editing it every day.
Right.
Great. And then just a couple of thank yous from Beth and Daniel, who said they just enjoyed all the poems very much and mentioned that Todd, how amazingly calm you are. And thank you for the great evening. Was just very soothing, grounding to hear both of you read. Really lovely.
That's nice. Well, let's do it again. Jim, the next time you have something come out, I hope I can be of service to you as you've been to me.
It's a deal. Steph, you better be there.
Sounds good. I'll see you guys.
All right.
Whatever it happens, I'm on call. Just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Majors and Quinn.
Yes, really our pleasure. I love doing these poetry evenings. You guys have both been so wonderful. For those still watching, I did put the website and our phone number in the comments section. So go order these books, support these poets, support a small independent bookstore. And Todd, Jim, I will see you guys next time.
Next time.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.